Hello, 1 2. This is English. This is English. 1 2 1 2.
Distinguished delegates, please take your seats. Distinguished delegates, please take your seats. Colleagues, friends, please take your seats. Distinguished delegates, I would like to call the meeting to order. Dear colleagues, it is a pleasure to be with you today to continue to chair this session. We will now finish consideration of agenda item 7, cooperation with other conventions and international organizations. We will then take up agenda item 10, that is long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming. Before we start, I would again like to impress on all delegates the importance of speaking slowly when you deliver your interventions. And again, I call on all speakers to upload your statements before taking the floor and at latest within 1 hour of the close of the plenary. When we closed yesterday, I said I would hear 4 remaining statements from the 4 observers who had requested the floor. Delegates, given the time constraints we face again, I request that statements be focused on concrete suggestions. I will offer parties the opportunity to support the proposals made by observers. Please limit your statements to no more than 3 minutes, please. Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. This statement is made by IUCN on behalf of the Secretariat of the Convention on Wetlands as the host of the Secretariat of the Convention on Wetlands. In relation to paragraph 46 of document SBI-04/10, cooperation with other conventions and international organizations, the Secretariat of the Convention on Wetlands is pleased to note that significant progress has been made in development of the 6th Joint Work Plan of the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Convention on Wetlands. Unfortunately, publication of this joint work plan as an information document for this meeting has not been possible on the established timelines. The joint work plan has been prepared by the secretariats of the 2 conventions, building on our long-standing collaboration and the findings and recommendations of the review of the 5th joint work plan. The Secretariat of the Convention on Wetlands thanks 18 contracting parties, the European Union and its 27 member states, as well as 19 observer organizations, including international organization partners of the Convention on Wetlands, that provided constructive inputs towards finalization of the plan. This sixth joint work plan seeks to strengthen alignment of efforts towards achievement of the objectives of both conventions, enhance cooperation, and maximize the impact of actions towards achievement of the goals and targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, a very concrete example of collaboration in the spirit of the Bern process. The Secretariat of the Convention on Wetlands encourages you to support this joint work plan and to pursue actions in line with the voluntary guidance it contains. Lastly, please note that the sixth joint work plan will be presented to the 63rd meeting of the Standing Committee of the Convention on Wetlands to be held from 3 to 7 June 2024 in Gland, Switzerland. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramsar Convention Wetlands. Biodiversity International, microphone number 187. You have the floor, please. Okay, thank you. No response. We'll move on to next. Subnational and local governments. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm taking the floor on behalf of the local and subnational government major group, coordinated by ICLEI, Regions 4, and the Government of Quebec. We took good note of the findings in the report of the Bern 3 conference that cooperation and synergies in MEA implementation at the national level is seen as vitally important to the efficient and effective delivery of both the Kunming-Montreal GBF and the associated goals and objectives of each MEA, and further, that national and subnational synergies were the most challenging to achieve. In this regard, local and subnational governments reiterate their commitment and readiness to support parties in enhancing collaboration with all UN conventions and international organizations, particularly through the Bern process, to contribute to the effective and efficient implementation of the GBF. Therefore, we welcome and support the UK's proposed additional paragraph 7 bis on the active engagement of subnational and local governments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, subnational local governments. I now offer parties to support the proposal made by subnational local government, if any, please. Yeah. Mexico, Singapore. Thank you. Youth, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair, for the floor. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We support the statement made by IFB and the OHCHR. GYBN welcomes the Bern process to strengthen cooperation and collaboration among biodiversity-related conventions, contributing to effective and efficient implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and encourage parties to further engage in the process. We highlight the importance of ensuring policy coherence when it comes to cross-cutting issues, specifically those related to climate and biodiversity intersection. The scientific community has been working for some time on the synergies and trade-offs between climate and biodiversity, as emphasized by the IPCC and IPBES workshop report. However, Currently, the draft recommendation only addresses synergies but lacks reference on the trade-offs. In regard, we note with concern that growing number of climate-related projects such as carbon markets, carbon offsets, nature-based solutions, and nature-positive initiatives are not being monitored and reported on closely to identify their impacts on biodiversity. Therefore, we recommend the following in draft recommendation. Add new paragraph 9, C bis, and read, collaborate with the Secretariat of other conventions, the United Nations Environment Programme, and other relevant organizations to develop common definitions and policies to prevent negative impacts for biodiversity, in particular regarding climate-related projects. In addition, the process of cooperation and collaboration must also take place on the ground, including increasing their interactions with indigenous people, local communities, women and youth, and international human rights organizations. Meaningful participation and human rights-based approaches are crucial to ensure the whole of society perspective in the implementation of global biodiversity framework, including particular attention to Section C of the cross-cutting consideration. Therefore, we recommend the following in the draft recommendation. Add new paragraph 9E bis that reads, further support the participation of representatives of indigenous people, local communities, women and youth in implementation of the framework, including in meeting of experts and informal advisory groups under the convention, activities related to cooperation and synergies among conventions, and exchange with parties and relevant stakeholders. We kindly ask parties to support these interventions. Thank you, Chair, for the floor.
Thank you, Youth. May I now offer the opportunity to parties to support the proposals made by Youth, please. Zimbabwe. Next is sorry, I couldn't see the figures properly. Can you? Zambia. Zambia, yeah. Okay, thank you. Philippines, Peru. Yeah, Peru. Yes, please. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, this concludes our consideration of agenda item 7. With the help of the Secretariat, I will prepare a CRP and will bring it for consideration to a later plenary session. Delegates, I would now like to take up agenda item 10, long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming. I will first ask the Secretariat to introduce the documents. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. On item 10, on the long-term strategic approach on mainstreaming, you have before you one comprehensive pre-session document as well as one complementing information document. Document CBD-SBI-04/13 is the principal document summarizing the work undertaken throughout the mainstreaming process and containing an in-depth analysis by the Secretariat on said process, as well as the draft recommendation. You will recall that COP Decision 1517 requested the Executive Secretary to organize an open-ended online forum to facilitate views on the draft long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming and associated action plan for consideration by the subsidiary body on implementation as at its fourth meeting. I am pleased to report that the open-ended online forum took place between December 2023 and January 2024, giving parties and stakeholders the opportunity to share their views on 4 specific questions on the LTAM and associated action plan. Therefore, information document CBD-SBI-04/NF/2 provides a compilation of all submissions made to the open-ended online forum, organized by the 4 questions posed to the forum. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Delegates, I will now open the floor. I encourage all interventions to be concise and focused on concrete suggestions. I would first invite parties speaking on behalf of regional groups. I repeat, regional groups. Statements made on behalf of regional groups may be up to 5 minutes. I request the parties speaking on behalf of regional groups to take the floor early. I could see only one party, Togo. Togo, you have the floor, please.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for having given me the floor. Now, Togo wishes to speak to agenda item 10 of our agenda of the current decision, and I'll be speaking on behalf of Africa, sir. The results of the work of the open-ended online forum on integration, which was held from November 2023 to January 2024, has shown that the long-term strategic approach for the mainstreaming of biodiversity, which was elaborated following decision 14/3, paragraph 17, is fully found within the KMGBF. We back decision CBD/SBI/4/13 as far as the taking into account of the mainstreaming of biodiversity in regional dialogues is concerned. Cooperation with conventions, organizations and institutions, the sharing of tools and mechanisms for the clearinghouse, the inclusion of experiences on mainstreaming of biodiversity in the 7th report. Having said all this, Africa would like to stress the need for the incorporation of the mainstreaming of biodiversity into existing development mechanisms, as well as capacity building mechanisms, and the drawing up of specific binary indicators on this topic to ensure that it is taken into account in the drafting of certain national reports in keeping with paragraph 3 of the current decision. In addition to this, Africa believes that it is important to look at all of the targets of the global framework which contribute to the implementation of the strategy over the long term to facilitate the taking of the necessary measures regarding the mainstreaming of biodiversity into these various targets. In addition to this, the work of the forum did reach one convention, namely that, given the fact that the strategic elements of the framework already tackle the issue of mainstreaming, the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming doesn't yield any added value. And for this reason, Africa would suggest that we include a paragraph on the updating of the strategy, which would be little f, paragraph little f of the recommendations to the Secretariat undertake, on the basis of the results of the global review, the updating of the long-term strategy to mainstream newly identified stakes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Togo. European Union, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. Mr. Chair, distinguished colleagues, the EU and its 27 member states continue to hold their long-standing position that mainstreaming of biodiversity is crucial for the implementation of the objectives of the CBD and therefore also for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity will not be achieved working in silos across governments and society. As biodiversity mainstreaming is still either lacking or insufficiently covered in many policy areas and sectors, we therefore share the view that there is an important need to further strengthen the mainstreaming of biodiversity. To this end, Mr. Chair, the EU and its member states are willing to continue working on the basis of the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming and its associated action plan with other parties. However, aware of the partial overlap between the ALTAM and the KM-GBF, and conscious of the different views and positions in this regard, we have also been reflecting on alternative ways to obtain adequate biodiversity mainstreaming throughout the whole of government and the whole of society. To this end, we believe that supportive material, such as a technical guidance document, a list of complementary voluntary actions, a toolbox, a list of tools, approaches, and best practices, or a CBD technical series on biodiversity mainstreaming, focusing in particular on relevant sectors which have not yet been addressed, needs to be developed. Also, a series of webinars to foster a community of practice for the exchange of lessons learned could be organized. As there is a wealth of information available, this should build on existing information, including the draft ALTAM and its action plan, with a view to implement biodiversity mainstreaming as reflected in the KM-GBF with more concrete, actionable elements. Part of this should already be made available for consideration to COP16 and shared through appropriate means, while further development of this supportive material should be requested by COP16. In addition, biodiversity mainstreaming needs to be strengthened in as concrete terms as possible in all processes and negotiations under the Convention, and in all relevant processes and negotiations in fora beyond the Convention. In this regard, we warmly welcome the updated FAO Action Plan to implement the FAO Biodiversity Mainstreaming Strategy. Furthermore, the EU and its member states consider it important to include the list of relevant sectors in the recommendation text, which got lost with the disappearance of the glossary, and which was based on CBD COP decisions 13/3, 14/3, and 14/4. As capacity building and development are crucial for the successful mainstreaming of biodiversity, we strongly support that this has been included in the draft recommendations, and we would like to expand the collaboration in this regard to the regional and sub-regional technical and scientific support centers as well. Finally, COP could encourage parties, other governments, relevant organizations and stakeholders to initiate a coalition of the willing as a forum for the promotion of biodiversity mainstreaming beyond the formal convention processes. We have provided the Secretariat with amendments in writing that reflect these positions. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, European Union. Argentina, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Argentina welcomes the opportunity to reflect once again on the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity. Argentina believes that the draft decision is a solid basis for discussions, and we have a few suggestions regarding it. Argentina agrees that the Global Biodiversity Framework covers in large part the needs for mainstream biodiversity, which drove the mandates adopted in Decision 14/3. In this regard, continuing to consider the draft long-term strategic approach could result in duplications or inefficiencies. As a result, Argentina suggests replacing paragraph 1 of the draft decision with an alternative version, which recognizes that the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, in particular its targets 14, 15, 16, and 18, as well as targets 19, 22, and 23, provides already a wide range of options for mainstream biodiversity, and also considers in that first paragraph that the mandates set out in Decision 14/3 in its paragraphs 17 and 18 have been completed. In addition, Argentina recommends not including the annexed document in the draft decision. In addition, we suggest introducing preambular paragraphs which note as follows, and this is reflected in the document. First, the concerns which emerged at SBI 13 and COP 15 on the scope of the draft strategic approach. Second, the low participation in intersessional processes on mainstreaming. And third, the regional imbalance in those processes, given that in the last online forum, parties from just a single regional group took part. Finally, on the suggestion to include considerations of mainstream biodiversity in the global review of collective progress, Argentina believes that this proposal should be addressed under item 3 of the agenda of the SBI on planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. To conclude, Argentina welcomes the fact that the lengthy discussions on mainstreaming have resulted in its integration in the Global Biodiversity Framework. Now the time has come to stop discussions and to focus on mainstream biodiversity as reflected in the global framework and through the 3 dimensions of sustainable development in a balanced manner. The proposed amendments will be submitted in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Argentina. Colleagues, now we will move on to individual parties. It appears that there are no more parties seeking floor to speak on behalf of regional groups. Yeah. Canada, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Canada believes that mainstreaming biodiversity is an important component to the successful implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Canada looks forward to hearing views from other parties on the future of this agenda item and the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming. Most importantly, Canada will support actions which promote practical and feasible solutions to mainstreaming biodiversity and integrating biodiversity values into policies, legal frameworks, regulations, planning and development processes, poverty eradication strategies, demand reductions, strategic environmental assessments, impact assessments, and national accounting. Should parties wish to continue work under this agenda item, Canada would support actions that ensure efforts are not duplicated and that existing resources are used as the foundation for this continued work. For example, Canada would suggest compiling options on sharing relevant information on existing mainstreaming tools and guidance in the various relevant sectors and/or targets. This could be done in a manner that facilitates access and use of these practical tools and guidance by all relevant actors. Furthermore, these options could then be presented for consideration by COP16. Once this work is completed, the Conference of the Parties at their 16th meeting could decide on the best way forward and address the future actions that can help support mainstreaming biodiversity. Canada will submit suggested changes to the draft recommendation text shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. Egypt, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is no doubt that mainstreaming is crucial for not only objectives of CBD and the global biodiversity framework, but if we remember, the issue of mainstreaming exists in all articles of conventions related to biodiversity, many decisions, many publications, and what have we done? Have we tried to assess what we have agreed upon in terms of the sectors, the 8 sectors that were approved by COP 13 and 14 to see what are the gaps, what have been achieved in a way that the list of these sectors proposed to us here could be expanded, whatever. The issue of policy at national level. Policy commitment is very crucial if we want to improve mainstreaming by getting everybody to sit together and agree in principles what is needed to be done. We need even at national level legislation as well to ensure mainstreaming is working at national level rather than at any other level as well. That's why the scope and the options available here, I wonder whether they will be implemented, whatever. But certainly the most important issue that deal with mainstreaming is environmental impact assessment or strategic impact assessment. If we do it properly and follow it up in terms of management of this, it can lead to considerable progress in terms of the mainstreaming, whatever. Finally, Mr. Chairman, the whole society approach in dealing with the mainstreaming is one of the most important options for us to be able to implement what we have agreed upon for almost 30 years. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Egypt. The following parties are in queue: Japan, Philippines, Mexico, Morocco, Brazil, Colombia. Japan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Japan would like to express our appreciation to the CBD Secretariat and the parties, international organizations, and others involved in the open-ended online forum for their efforts in establishing the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity, or LTAM. As per COP decision 1517, Japan believes it is important to mainstream biodiversity in line with KMGBF in all sectors. Japan has been making various efforts in our country, including the establishment of the Japan Conference for 2030 Global Biodiversity Framework, JGBF, as a nationwide multi-stakeholder platform to facilitate partnership and collaboration among the public, business communities, and NGOs, NPOs, local government sectors for the effective implementation of the GBF. Recently, Japan has also prepared a national strategy for the transition strategies toward the nature-positive economy by having representatives of the various sectors and experts. We consider that the alignment of the KMGBF and the LTAM in this recommendation is an important process to mainstream biodiversity in more effective and structured way, and we support the way forward. With regard to the paragraph 4E of the draft COP decision, since the progress of KMGBF targets 14, 15, and 16 related to mainstreaming biodiversity will be assessed as part of the global review by collecting and reviewing the progress based on the national reports. Therefore, we consider it is necessary to avoid any duplication of efforts, and we would like to propose the deletion of the preparatory activities for to make sure such activities will be conducted within the global review, but not as a separated and a parallel process. And take this opportunity, I would like to show the image of Daidarapoji, which I shared my previous interventions for agenda item 6. Please check the Japanese statement of item 6. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Japan. Philippines, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. The Philippines supports the draft recommendation on the establishment of a long-term strategic approach for mainstreaming biodiversity that is fully reflected in the KMGBF, particularly in targets 14, 15, 16, and 18, as well as targets 19, 22, and 23. We thank the Secretariat for the preparation of document SBI-04/13. The Philippines has been undertaking a number of initiatives, including policy support on mainstreaming biodiversity into national development plans and sectors, such as agriculture, mining, infrastructure, manufacturing, and health, as well as mainstreaming at all levels of government with the participation of and contributions of women, youth, indigenous peoples and local communities, and civil society organizations. In particular, on mainstreaming biodiversity into agriculture sector, the Philippines has issued a joint administrative order in 2021 between the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and the Department of Agriculture on mainstreaming biodiversity-friendly agricultural practices in and around protected areas and mainstreaming into wider agricultural landscapes. Relative to this, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources has ongoing initiatives on biodiversity-friendly enterprise in coordination with the Department of Trade and Industry and the Department of Tourism. The Philippines, through the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, issued an administrative order in 2022 on enhancing biodiversity conservation and protection in mining operations to provide adequate measures for responsible mining to ensure conservation of biodiversity and promote the sustainable development and utilization of the country's natural and mineral resources. These are complemented by regional initiatives in ASEAN through the development of a multilateral framework on mainstreaming, as well as sectoral frameworks on agriculture, tourism, health, fisheries, infrastructure, and urban development, including mainstreaming under the ASEAN Business and Biodiversity Initiative. And finally, the Philippines also supports the recommendation for parties and relevant organizations and stakeholders to provide relevant information, including on good practices, innovations, challenges, and lessons learned with regard to biodiversity mainstreaming through their 7th national reports, in line with Decision 15/6, and to capacity building activities relative to biodiversity mainstreaming. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Philippines. Mexico, you have the floor, please.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico, as host of COP13 in Cancun in 2016, promoted mainstreaming of criteria of the sustainable conservation and use of biodiversity, or biodiversity mainstreaming, in various sectors to tackle the biodiversity crisis in a comprehensive manner. For the first time, under the CDB, we established high-level dialogues with the agricultural, fisheries, forestries, and tourist sectors, achieving substantive agreements for diagnostics and implementation of relevant measures. An example of this is the FAO strategy to mainstream biodiversity in agriculture at the global and national levels. Similar dialogues were held during COP14 in Egypt, in sectors such as the energy sector, among others, or manufacturing. During COP15 in Montreal, although we did not achieve consensus on the long-term approach on mainstreaming, Mexico identifies that some of the elements in this document were incorporated into the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Nevertheless, although biodiversity mainstreaming supports the 23 targets of the framework, the means for its implementation are not clear or explicit. We need a platform which facilitates the mainstreaming of biodiversity in all sectors, recognizing that there are no generic solutions and that each sector requires solutions made to measure. If we want to achieve the targets up to 2030, we have to work on providing these resources as soon as possible. Therefore, we must develop a work agenda which is continuous, at least up to 2030, on biodiversity mainstreaming under the Convention. In particular, supporting targets 10, 14, 15, 16, and 18. These targets represent major challenges in its implementation, as they require negotiation with sectors which are not necessarily aware of the importance of the sustainable conservation and use of biodiversity. We have to develop capacities and adequate tools to provide incentives to decision makers in these sectors to take part in the implementation of effective measures, including coordination processes with international organizations such as the Bern process. We propose that the 2024-2030 work agenda for mainstream biodiversity in the CDB include, amongst others, proposals for the development of toolboxes which contain tools which is essential for the development of tools, a critical path for the identification of gaps of information, and proposals for establishment of informal advisory groups with a focus on sectors. Mexico calls on parties to recognize that without a robust and relevant agenda on biodiversity mainstreaming, we risk failing in achieving the targets of the global framework. In fact, that risk will be much higher. We will send our proposed amendments to the text of the draft recommendation in writing to Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. The parties in queue are Morocco, Brazil, Colombia, Australia, UK, Uganda, Norway, Cote d'Ivoire, Chile, Indonesia. Morocco, you have the floor, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, Chair. Morocco endorses Togo's statement made on behalf of Africa. Morocco takes note with satisfaction of the analysis of the draft long-term strategic approach for the mainstreaming of biodiversity into the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This analysis has shown that there are inconsistencies between the language used in the draft long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming and the framework, and that some elements of the corresponding framework's targets are not addressed in the main set of actions of the draft long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming. This conclusion of the analysis is not found in the draft decision, nor does this last propose any action to be taken to remedy the situation. Furthermore, paragraph 1 of the draft decision is unclear. Does it decide that the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity should be fully contained in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or does it say that the strategic approach is fully contained in the KM-GBF? This is why Morocco believes that the long-term strategic approach to the mainstreaming of biological diversity should be revised to take into account the conclusions of the analysis. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Morocco. Brazil, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Brazil understands that the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, particularly its targets 14, 15, 16, and 18, as well as targets 19, 22, and 23, provides a wide range of options for mainstreaming biodiversity. and we consider that the mandates in paragraphs 17 and 18 of Decision 14/3 have been completed. As a cross-cutting priority, Brazil believes that biodiversity mainstreaming needs to consider the three dimensions of sustainable development in a balanced manner, and actions related to biodiversity mainstreaming need to be implemented on a flexible basis, as countries face different challenges and have different capacities, and there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. We believe the targets 1, 2, 8, 9, 10, 20, and 21 of the key MGBF are as important for biodiversity mainstreaming, as they acknowledge that biodiversity can be a source of innovative solutions across different sectors, in a manner supportive of sustainable livelihoods, poverty eradication, and the restoration of productive ecosystems. Target 13 is also crucial to support biodiversity mainstreaming, as a fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of generic resources can foster the development of commercial products and enhance value addition. This would enable countries to leverage investments in more sustainable practices across a wide range of activities. That being said, we understand the importance of improving the understanding of biodiversity mainstreaming by highlighting the role of biodiversity to foster innovation. We would suggest additional language encouraging parties to foster innovative business models that can contribute to the three objectives of the Convention, and to support sustainable activities that promote value addition through conservation, sustainable use, or benefit sharing. We would also propose that the Secretariat compile experiences from parties in that regard, and further compile submissions on technical, scientific, and technological gaps that may undermine countries' capacities to support mainstreaming. Those actions could provide a basis for further discussions in SBI-6. We will be submitting our proposals in writing, and we would add our voices to the proposals made by Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Colombia would like to align itself with the proposals made by Mexico on developing a continuous work agenda up to 2030 on mainstream biodiversity under the CBD. Colombia believes that the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity is very important, and we need to recognize the actions set out in the action plan. We have to generate activities for the fisheries sectors, in governing sectors, economic sectors, in mainstream biodiversity, amongst others. In addition, we also highlight the relevance of working tirelessly on an action plan up to 2030 for targets 10, 14, 15, 16, and 18, and emphasize concrete actions and progress in the short term. On the draft recommendation, Colombia believes that although the framework contains messages on mainstreaming, we have to prioritize specific actions which enable mainstream biodiversity in all sectors. We also believe it's important to coordinate the contributions of the regional, sub-regional centers with this goal so that they can guarantee long-term mainstreaming. Colombia recognizes that the measures contained in the draft recommendation set out some tools and measures for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and therefore will be key for mainstreaming biodiversity. And we also propose an approach to involve communities in mainstream biodiversity. Colombia highlights the importance of mainstream biodiversity in all sectors, with particular attention to the sectors identified in Target 10 of the framework, that is agriculture, fisheries, forestries, and those set out in national biodiversity action plans such as mining, energy, transport, infrastructure, commerce, industries, and tourism. We propose the development of concrete actions at local level in order to focus intervention actions for mainstream biodiversity. In addition, Colombia strongly highlights that capacity building on technical level for participation of indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, local communities, women and youth is needed in mainstreaming processes, including as first level work for priority targets for those groups. Finally, Colombia identifies productive sectors which enable to promote and develop capacity building and specialized technology for the entire production and value chain as essential. we need to ensure that all is involved to avoid loss of biodiversity. Colombia has some more comments which we will send in writing. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. Australia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Australia is strongly supportive of mainstreaming across all sectors to encourage business, industry, and all sectors of government, including subnational and local governments, to place biodiversity conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity at the forefront of their decision-making in order to avoid the threats to biodiversity, including to the dwarf damselfly. We believe that the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming is sufficiently integrated into the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. However, we would like to see continued work on mainstreaming, given its important role in the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework across all sectors. Mainstreaming is one of the 3 enablers of change identified during the preparation of our updated NBSAP, Australia's Strategy for Nature, which will be finalised and submitted before COP16 in Cali, Colombia. Australia's updated NBSAP will set 6 ambitious national targets to focus action in priority areas of most relevance and impact in addressing biodiversity decline in Australia. As a key enabler of change, mainstreaming is critical to Australia's progress in achieving the targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. To enable progress on this important area of work, Australia will look to insert an addition to paragraph 4 of the draft recommendations in point E to not only consider the progress, but analyse gaps and barriers to mainstreaming identified by parties, with the view that these gaps and challenges will be considered and that parties are able to identify issues and share lessons in the endeavour to mainstream biodiversity into all decisions across all sectors and organisations. We will provide this addition to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. United Kingdom, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The UK welcomes the work undertaken by the Executive Secretary, as well as parties and stakeholders, for their input to the development of the long-term approach to mainstreaming biodiversity. Given the significance of this issue to the mission, goals and targets of the KMGBF, it is important to take time to consider the change in approach now proposed in the draft decision. While there has been a reduction in participation in intersessional processes related to the LTAM, there is no doubt that the previous input demonstrates the level of importance that we and others attribute to mainstreaming. The proposal to undertake biodiversity mainstreaming as reflected in the GBF is logical, given that the aspects addressed in the LTAM are essentially covered by the framework and the commitment already made to use the GBF as a strategic plan for implementation of the Convention. However, the continued active commitment to mainstreaming and to monitoring of the effectiveness of this way forward is critical. Therefore, we welcome the elements of the proposed decision in paragraph 4, which details some specific actions that should be taken to put this into practice, and to monitor the effectiveness of this approach, with the intention to further modify actions in the future to ensure successful implementation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Uganda, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair and distinguished delegates. Uganda concurs with Africa's states as articulated by Togo on the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity. We appreciate the note CBD-Live/CBI-04/13 from the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity. It summarizes the work done in response to Decision 15/17, Section 2, analyzes options for advancing the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming, Section 3, and provides recommendation elements, Section 4, for the subsidiary bodies' fourth meeting. Uganda recognizes that the added value of the draft long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming compared to the existing strategic elements in the framework is not clear. Therefore, Uganda proposes that the long-term strategic approach for mainstreaming biodiversity be fully incorporated in the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, especially in the targets 14, 15, 16, and 18, as well as targets 19, 22, and 23. Other targets and Section C of the framework are also pertinent. Uganda urges international and other relevant organizations to support biodiversity mainstreaming as outlined in the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This support should be particularly enable mainstreaming at all government levels, fostering the full and effective contributions of women, youth, indigenous people, local communities, civil society organizations, the private and financial sectors, and stakeholders from all other sectors. Uganda advocates for ongoing capacity building activities related to the biodiversity mainstreaming. These activities should be in collaboration with parties, other governments, and relevant organizations and initiatives. This includes existing coalition and networks of women, youth, indigenous people, local communities, civil society organizations, subnational governments, the private and financial sectors, and other relevant sector holders. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. Norway, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Norway would like to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of this agenda item. Norway agrees with the draft recommendation stating that the long-term strategic approach for mainstreaming biodiversity is fully reflected in the Global Biodiversity Framework, among other but not limited to targets 14, 15, 16, and 18, as well as targets 19, 22, and 23. Norway aspires to undertake biodiversity mainstreaming as reflected in the framework and to enable mainstreaming at all levels of government with full and effective contributions of all relevant stakeholders contributing to the global goals and targets. These efforts should be a part of the long-term cyclical approach to implementation of the KMGBF and its 2050 goals, with the interplay between the findings of the upcoming global collective reviews and the future updates of the MBSAPs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Norway. Cote d'Ivoire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor, sir. Sir, Cote d'Ivoire wishes to back the African position as expressed by Togo. The issue of mainstreaming biological diversity into sectors is a current and topical one for my country, indeed. A study aimed at mainstreaming, or rather integrating access and benefit sharing, ABS, issues into sectors is currently being carried out with the support of the ABS Capacity Building Initiative. The study will feed into the national strategy and action plan aligned with the Global Biodiversity Framework currently under review. It therefore represents an opportunity for the mainstreaming of biological diversity into all sectors. Côte d'Ivoire welcomes the document submitted for our consideration, document 4/13. The summary of the work carried out in response to decision 15/17 shows that the long-term strategic approach for the mainstreaming of biological diversity drawn up in accordance with paragraph 17 of decision 14/3 is in line with the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Indeed, almost all the targets of the global framework are taken into account by the strategic approach. It is important to mention them in the decision before us, so that the issue of mainstreaming biological diversity into the treatment of these targets can be effectively taken into account when updating or revising the NBSAPs and implementing them at a national level. Finally, Côte d'Ivoire suggests adding to point D of the decision the development of capacity building activities relating to the mainstreaming of biological diversity. For it is not always the case that we have the capacity to mainstream biodiversity or a theme while suggesting that we take its revision into account. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kotiva. The parties in queue are Chile, Indonesia, China, Costa Rica, Democratic Republic of Congo, Fiji. Chile, you have the floor.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Chile welcomes the work carried out by the Secretariat and believes that the draft recommendation on the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity is a good starting point for discussions between parties. During the second part of COP15, Chile had amongst its priorities to reflect in ambitious and cross-cutting manner the full and effective mainstreaming of biodiversity in decision-making both in the public and private sectors, including the financial sector. Chile agrees that the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is an ambitious plan which reflects the cross-cutting nature of biodiversity. However, Chile believes that progress will be reflected through the effective implementation of targets 10, 14, 15, 16 and 18 of the Global Biodiversity Framework. In this regard, we agree with the statement made by Mexico to develop a work agenda up to 2030, which supports and facilitates the effective mainstreaming of biodiversity in the CBD. Our proposed amendments will be sent in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chile. Indonesia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. At the outset, Indonesia would like to convey our support to the statement made by Egypt, Brazil, Argentina, the Philippines, and other parties. Indonesia appreciates the Secretariat for its report. On the analysis presented in Section 3 regarding the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity, Indonesia agrees with the view that the added value of this document remains unclear and its content appear to have been adequately reflected in the KMGBF. Consequently, Indonesia considers the KMGBF to be the principal framework as well as a long-term strategy for promoting the mainstreaming of biodiversity across various sectors. To effectively support the implementation of the KMGBF, we emphasize the importance of reinforcing capacity building, ensuring adequate funding to meet targets, and establishing realistic indicators. In that regard, we propose that the draft COP decision provides a clear way forward or decision on the matter to avoid further misunderstanding on the status of this document. The text along the lines would read as follows. First, recognize that the Global Biodiversity Framework already provides our long-term biodiversity strategic approach, hence the work as mandated under Decision 14/3 is considered concluded. And second, invites parties to undertake their biodiversity mainstreaming action following the Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. The parties in queue are China, Costa Rica, Democratic Republic of Congo, Fiji, Peru, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, Switzerland. China, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, the importance of biodiversity mainstreaming is a consensus. China highly emphasizes mainstreaming work. Our updated MPSAP has made it a priority, including 6 priority action areas, including policies, regulations, governance mechanism, planning, programming, publicity, business and public actions. China appreciates the intersessional work of the Secretariat, including another round of call for inputs and open-ended online forum. We believe that the current long-term mainstreaming strategy and action plans constitute a good basis. The framework does contain mainstreaming content, but mostly as general descriptions. The long-term strategic approach and action could serve as a flexible and concrete guidance. The framework emphasizes a whole-of-government, whole-of-society approach, but in practice, many stakeholders still have difficulties in mainstreaming, and they need tools and guidance for it. Adopting a standalone COP decision on long-term strategic approach is in itself good for mainstreaming. China suggests that it could be better improved and adopted at COP16 as a guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Chena. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be quite brief. On document SBI-04/13, we would like to note that the methods of the framework are not isolated from everything else within CBD. Each target has a very wide-ranging context. On mainstream biodiversity, Costa Rica supports everything said by Mexico, in the sense that we need to keep this topic on the agenda because it's directly related to the implementation of the framework targets, in particular 10, 14, 15, 16, 18. Thank you.
Thank you, Costa Rica. Democratic Republic of Congo, you have the floor, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. The Democratic Republic of the Congo reiterates or aligns itself with the declaration made by Togo on behalf of the African Group. DRC firmly believes that mainstreaming biodiversity in relevant sectors of national life is essential to achieving the goals of the Convention and its protocols. The mining sector, for which the DRC is considered as essential due to all of the natural mineral resources in the country, is critical. This has a considerable impact on biodiversity and human health. Sectors of hydrocarbons, where DRC has identified 27 sources of oil and many other sources of gas, also have high impacts. In terms of forestries and agriculture, DRC also has many hectares of agricultural and forest lands. In the energy sector, transport sector, industry, in health, and in education, we're also affected. We ask for particular emphasis to be placed on the impacts of these sectors on biodiversity. DRC has mainstreamed into its Law 14 on conservation of nature the need to assess environmental and social impacts of large projects, and this effect created the Congolese Agency for the Environment in order to set out environmental and social impact assessments and to ensure monitoring of the implementation of measures to safeguard the environment and society. We think it is essential to continue to work on this issue with clear methods and strategies. Since the Aichi objectives, mainstream biodiversity has not sufficiently benefited from capacity building and development and technical and scientific cooperation and the sharing of knowledge and technology transfer in an adequate manner to enable us to fully resolve the issues faced. Paragraphs 1 and 2 of the preamble section of the draft recommendation to the COP call for decisions of the COP without specifying what decisions they're referring to. We propose that these decisions be clearly mentioned in the text. Finally, we are not convinced that taking into account mainstreaming in Target 18 in particular, since there is still a lot of negative incentives which harm biodiversity, and little financing in favor of biodiversity and positive incentives. Therefore, we believe that we should continue discussions and work on these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Democratic Republic of Congo. Fiji, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Fiji notes that there is a lot of elements of mainstreaming in the Kunming GBF into other sectors as agreed at COP15. However, there is no clear guidelines or indicators to effectively mainstream the GBF and the NBCEP across other sectors. Fiji notes that as it stands, the GBF and the monitoring framework lacks clarity, benchmarks, and guidance to support parties in developing and in implementing effective national and sectoral mainstreaming action plans. Fiji requests the SBI to recommend to COP16 for an adoption of a strong, time-bound CBD agenda on mainstreaming with clear linkages with relevant MEAs, multilateral organizations, processes, and bodies, and a prominent and sustained 2024 to 2030 mainstreaming agenda under the CBD should include supporting parties to adequately integrate and implement mainstreaming elements in the NBCEP, to include guidance related with mainstreaming and work with relevant multilateral organizations and stakeholders to address the identified gaps, facilitating the development and adoption of global targets, strategies, and action plans for the transition of all sectors for biodiversity mainstreaming, integrating mainstreaming into resource mobilization discussions, decisions, and plans, including repurpose of harmful subsidies, scaling up best practices that can effectively reduce drivers of biodiversity loss, ensure clear linkages to relevant global and multilateral environmental agreements, bodies, and processes to promote the development, adoption, and implementation of transitional strategies of all sectors to fully mainstream biodiversity, and to ensure that the mainstreaming agenda is gender responsive, inclusive of transparent, and respects in the rights of the IPLCs, women, and youths. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Fiji. Distinguished delegates, I would like to inform you all that many parties who have made interventions, made statements, have not uploaded, please. They're very, very urgent. Please take note of my request and accordingly upload as early as possible. Thank you. Peru, you have the floor, please.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Chair. Peru urges parties to develop a solid agenda for mainstream biodiversity in productive sectors, which guarantees continuous progress for the implementation of the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework up to 2030. To achieve this, we propose that the Executive Secretary develop a task to draft an agenda on mainstream for the Convention with deadlines for review by SBI-05 with the goal of adopting it at COP16. Peru recommends that this agenda have deadlines and be designed in a way to support and enable cross-cutting measures by countries at various levels. Rather than increasing their burden of work, Peru recognizes the importance of Target 14 as a cross-cutting measure for the entire framework. Its implementation is essential in order to facilitate the adoption of a commitment by productive sectors for its implementation. We won't achieve the targets and goals of the framework without tangible, verified, and short-term measures to incorporate biodiversity in effective decision-making in all sectors which share issues of biodiversity. We need key commitments for mainstream biodiversity. The framework itself don't have sufficiently clear accountability measures. This will be a key for the framework in line with the Aichi goals. For the Agenda 2024-2030, we need tools and measures which guarantee that parties receive sufficient support to mainstream and implement measures to mainstream in action plans. Secondly, we need to promote within global multilateral bodies the development and adoption and implementation of plans in productive sectors to fully mainstream biodiversity. The framework is a framework for all. The Convention should play a crucial role in promotion of and adoption and implementation of the global framework in other sectors. Thirdly, the mainstreaming in decision-making, mobilization resource measures is essential. We need to incorporate best practices in productive sectors in order to effectively reduce factors which drive biodiversity loss. Achieving the targets of the global framework needs to be more financially viable. Peru supports the statement made by Mexico and Colombia, and we will send additional proposed amendments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Peru. Ethiopia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ethiopia supports a statement made by Togo on behalf of Africa. Ethiopia supports the current draft of strategic approach, though with reservations regarding its adequacy. We perceive overlaps and inconsistency between the draft strategic approach and the KMGBF, which necessitates comprehensive coverage in the latter. Despite years of discussions, Ethiopia believes the outcome achieved is not as expected by the Conference of Parties. Therefore, the long-term strategic approach to mainstream biodiversity requires a real transformation to be considered by the Secretariat of the CBD, which could also include its consideration as a level of the forthcoming regional excellency centers. In our view, mainstreaming biodiversity issue should be properly highlighted during the high-level segment at various CBD COP meetings to achieve positive outcomes, to employing a whole of government and whole of society approach. Ethiopia also requests the Secretariat to develop appropriate means to track the effective mainstreaming of biodiversity into sectors across regional and national levels, involving diverse stakeholders for effective contributions. In this regard, the Executive Secretary is also requested to collaborate with relevant entities to support mainstreaming efforts, share tools and detailed guidance, facilitate capacity building activities, and consider progress in mainstreaming for the global review of the framework's implementation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ethiopia. The parties in queue are Zimbabwe, Switzerland, South Africa, Lebanon. Zimbabwe, you have the floor, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Zimbabwe fully supports the statement made by Togo on behalf of the Africa Group. Chair, Zimbabwe appreciates that the successful implementation of the KMGBF depends on mainstreaming of biodiversity across all sectors. It is clear that sufficient resources and capacity building support activities are needed to integrate biodiversity provisions in all relevant policies and laws at national level. Chair, Zimbabwe wishes to emphasize the importance of engaging all of society at all levels, including all stakeholders at international and domestic level, for effective integration of biodiversity in policy and practice. Chair, Zimbabwe appreciates the long-term strategy as a guidance and reference document for mainstreaming and calls for its further update with time. Zimbabwe also welcomes the draft decision in document CBD-SBI-04/13 and also calls for consideration of all the 23 GBF targets beyond those stated in operative paragraph 1 in carrying out mainstreaming activities. Chair, Zimbabwe will provide suggested textual changes to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. Switzerland, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. For Switzerland, mainstreaming and synergies are two sisters, both important for successful implementation of the GBF and the halt of biodiversity loss. As Egypt, we are of the view that mainstreaming is primarily important on the national level. But governments might need a little push by the CBD COP. Switzerland congratulates the Secretariat for the sober analysis of the interests and values of the long-term strategic approach and shares its conclusions. But on the evidence proposed by the Secretariat, for us, the added value of the draft recommendation is not 100% clear. Switzerland thus welcomes the decision recommendation to recognize the GBF, in particular targets 14, 15, 16, 18, as well as 19, 20, 22, and 23, as sufficiently capturing our common goal of mainstreaming biodiversity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. South Africa, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. South Africa supports the statement made by Togo on behalf of Africa. Chair, mainstreaming biodiversity across government sectors and its policy is critical for developing countries to ensure that the conservation, sustainable use, and access and benefit sharing of biological diversity is considered in all policy areas, in particular with regard to policies related to finance, economics, planning, development, poverty alleviation, and reducing inequality. Chair, the implementation of the NB-SUP and the National Biodiversity Finance Plan depends on mainstreaming for implementation, noting that economic and social development and poverty eradication are the first and overriding priorities for developing countries. Mainstreaming of biodiversity is an essential enabler for the global biodiversity. Africa believes that the LTAM and its action plan is an important tool to enhance means of implementation. In this regard, we do not support putting into abeyance the LTAM and propose the re-establishment of an expert group to guide further consultation on updating the LTAM and action plan in a manner that is reflective of diverse views and fully aligned with the GBF for a whole of society approach. This is in light of the fact that the LTM and action plan have not been subjected to an in-depth discussion and limited parties have participated in the online forum and the peer review process. We also note that the draft decision did not take into account some of the useful recommendations contained in the online forum, such as consideration to include the proposal to establish an ATEC to advise parties and stakeholders on the implementation and review of the LTAM, and to collaborate with other ATECs such as the CBD ATEC on indicators. In light of the above, South Africa proposes that this agenda item be postponed to SBI-5, scheduled to take place from the 16th to the 18th of October, in order to afford sufficient opportunities for parties to further participate in the open-ended online forum for a limited period. In conclusion, South Africa welcomes the reference to enabling mainstreaming at all levels of government in recommendation 16.2 in the document, CBD/SBI/4/13, and wish to recall decision CBD COP/DEC/15/12 to promote the engagement of subnational governments, cities, and other local authorities, and the critical role they play in mainstreaming of biodiversity. Furthermore, South Africa has made proposal on the text of the draft recommendation and will be available to engage further. I thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Lebanon, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lebanon recognizes the importance of mainstreaming biodiversity in other sectors and its reflection in strong manner in the global biodiversity framework, in order to reach an efficient conservation of biodiversity at all levels and to hold biodiversity loss. And we support the draft recommendation related to long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity contained in document CBD-SBI-04/13. Lebanon started to enhance biodiversity mainstreaming in the country since 2012, when the decree related to environmental impact assessment was issued, and which requires that all major development and infrastructure projects in all sectors in Lebanon should undergo an impact assessment study before being approved. This study covers assessment of the impact of these projects on biodiversity and defines the necessary mitigation measures that should be applied to reduce the negative impact that these projects may have on biodiversity. In addition, during the current process of updating the MBSAP in Lebanon, all stakeholders from concerned other sectors are being involved in the process in order to ensure that our updated national targets will integrate in a considerable manner biodiversity mainstreaming in other sectors, mainly agriculture, forestry, fisheries, industry, water and energy, tourism, and others, and to guarantee the long-term mainstreaming of biodiversity in these sectors. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lebanon. I see no more requests from the parties. Friends, due to immense pressure of time and to deliver, I'm not in a position to give floor to observer organizations under this item. I thank you for your understanding and cooperation. However, please upload your statements. We will take note of it. Thank you. We will get back in a minute, please. Friends, we have now reached the conclusion of our discussions on this item. I think probably I may go for establishment of Friends of Chair. However, we have not received, still not yet received statements from the written statements to please upload them as early as possible. Now, I urge you all to do it as early as possible. We have had a very rich discussion and variety and suggestions, please. I'll get back to you in a minute. At the end of this session, I'll be giving you a picture, clear picture of on proceeding further on this item. Now, we will move on further on to agenda item 8, review of the effectiveness of the processes under the convention and its protocols. Friends, I will first ask the Secretariat to introduce this item. Secretariat, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. In Decision 1433, the Conference of the Parties approved a procedure for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest in expert groups and requested the Executive Secretary to prepare a report on the implementation of the procedure, including any proposed updates and amendments to the current procedure for consideration by the subsidiary body on implementation. In sections B and C of its decision 1518, the Conference of the Parties adopted a number of provisions with regard to experience with online meetings and other areas to improve effectiveness, respectively. In the same decision, it requested the Executive Secretary to compile views from parties and relevant stakeholders and the experience and relevant studies available on conducting online and hybrid meetings in 2021 and 2022, and to prepare options for procedures for such hybrid meetings and, under extraordinary circumstances, for online meetings for consideration by the subsidiary body at its fourth meeting. It also requested the Executive Secretary to prepare, in consultation with parties, partners, and stakeholders, an analysis of options to further improve the effectiveness of meetings and negotiation processes, and to submit the analysis to the subsidiary body for its consideration at the present meeting. In light of these decisions, the Secretariat has prepared document CBD-SBI-04 on the review of the effectiveness of processes under the Convention and its protocols, which also contains 3 sets of suggested recommendations for the consideration of the subsidiary body, relating to, first, procedure for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest in expert groups; second, procedures for convening virtual and hybrid meetings, and third, options to further improve negotiation processes to better follow up previous decisions and to explore modalities for better engagement of observers. The Secretariat recognizes the minor errors that appear in the numbering or cross-referencing of paragraphs in the draft recommendation section of the document. These will be corrected as the paragraphs in the draft recommendations evolve. You have also before you document CBD-SBI-04 Add 1, containing a report on the implementation of the procedure for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest in expert groups. A compilation of the views and information received from parties and stakeholders on virtual and hybrid meetings is also compiled and made available as an information document, CBD-SBI-4 Inf 11. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Thank you, Secretariat, for the introduction. I would like to open the floor for interventions on agenda item 8 on review of the effectiveness of the processes under the convention and its protocols. We may proceed in the following order. First, we will address the sub-item on the report on the implementation of the procedure for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest. As indicated by the Secretariat, the suggested recommendations for this sub-item is contained in documents SBI-04/11 under A of section 5. The same document to address the procedure for convening virtual and hybrid meetings and options to further improve effectiveness of hear from observers. I encourage all interventions to be focused on concrete suggestions on the draft recommendation. Statements on regional groups may be up to 5 minutes. Statements by parties will be limited to 3 minutes. I now invite statements from parties speaking on behalf of regional groups. Please, one.
Member states. We welcome the proposed new procedure for managing conflict of interest in expert groups and find this useful. We would, however, propose to already ask the Secretariat to report on the operation of the procedure at COP19 to allow any necessary adjustments to be made. With regard to virtual meetings, we recognize the limitations, but also the potential benefits, in particular of hybrid meetings. We support the continued use of hybrid and virtual meetings, but consider that thought should be given to ensuring rotation of time zones for fully virtual meetings. We also recognize the value of being able to follow sessions online. This has many advantages, both for participants sur place and by enabling colleagues to follow the discussions remotely. Consideration should also be given to holding virtual Bureau meetings more frequently to enable the Bureau to have greater input into the organization of the meetings, as well as virtual presentations to all parties of information on budget and administrative matters ahead of each COP. As regards improving the effectiveness of processes under the Convention and its protocols, the EU and its member states consider that the Secretariat should continue to explore and make use of relevant ways and means
to improve preparation of meetings, and we will submit proposals to this effect. We note that the functional review foreseen by paragraph 35 of Decision 1534 still has not been carried out. This review is essential to understanding whether the Secretariat has sufficient resources to meet its workload. We will raise further points in relation to this under Agenda Item 13. We support the suggestion to have a scenario note for meetings of subsidiary bodies and of the COP to assist the chairs and the Bureau in supporting the smooth operation of meetings. Scenario notes should be shared with parties in advance of meetings to clearly set the parameters for what is expected of parties and describe how the meetings will run. We note the difficulties caused for all delegations when meeting documents are not circulated sufficiently in advance as required by the relevant rules of procedure or modus operandi, or are not made available at the same time in all official languages, both before and during meetings. This makes it hard for parties to properly prepare, which wastes time and risks reducing the quality of outputs. We would also find it highly valuable if major groups and stakeholders could provide their statements in advance of meetings to enable parties to consider them and be prepared to give support. We also consider that documents related to all substantive agenda items should include the administrative and financial implications as foreseen in the Rules of Procedure. In addition, we note the knock-on effect of delays in commissioning studies and papers that help to inform the discussions by the parties, and would request the Secretariat to improve its internal processes for the commissioning of external work in order to allow sufficient time for full and proper peer review and subsequent consideration of documents by all parties in advance of sessions of the subsidiary bodies and of the COP. We support the proposal for training for chairs and co-chairs and the provision of clear guidelines for the operation of plenary sessions, contact groups, and friends of the chair to ensure consistency of approach. The guidelines should include terms of engagement, how to deal with new text proposals at different stages of the process, time limits for plenary discussions, clear indications of when to move to a smaller setting for a more focused discussion, and how to ensure operation of huddles in line with the UN Code of Conduct. We also support the introduction of a clear schedule for the preparation of each meeting linked to the scenario notes, with Bureau meetings timed at strategic points to guide the process. Finally, we consider that the structure of the CBD website and the app need to be reviewed in order to make them more user-friendly, and the content needs to be updated to fully reflect recent developments. We will submit text proposals to reflect these suggestions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, European Union. Zimbabwe, you have the floor, please.
Chair, distinguished delegates, Zimbabwe is making this statement on behalf of Africa. Chair, Africa values the review process as it strengthens the convention and its protocols in meeting their objectives in a balanced manner. Africa appreciates the effort that Secretariat is making in ensuring full and effective participation of representatives of developing country parties, in particular the least developed countries, small island developing states, and countries with economies in transition in the concurrent meetings, and the importance of ensuring adequate participation of representatives in meetings of the parties to the protocol by making funding available for such participation. And in this regard, recalls Decision 14/37, paragraphs 36 to 46. However, Africa is concerned with the limited number of participants being supported and is requesting Secretariat to extend the support of focal points for the convention and its protocols. Africa requests the Secretariat to make funding available to 3 delegates, 1 for each of the 3 bodies, to increase participation of representatives of developing country parties. Chair, Africa further appreciates the Secretariat's report CBD-SBI-04/11/Add1 on the implementation of the procedure for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest in experts groups in line with decision 14/33. Africa acknowledges the report and takes it as a good working framework subject to amendments and updates, including consultancies, methodologies, and stakeholder inclusivity. In addition, Africa appreciates the work done by the Secretariat on the procedures for convening virtual and hybrid meetings. Chair, common challenges of virtual meetings identified by parties from previous such meetings, including time differences and connectivity, which limit the level of participation, cannot be overemphasized. Most African countries have been disadvantaged with the reality of the digital divide. Africa therefore upholds AMCEN 18th meeting thrust of maintaining the principle of no virtual negotiation on substantive matters. Africa is therefore of the view that substantive matters, such as budgetary issues, cannot be decided over a virtual platform. Africa recognizes budgetary matters as very critical for the implementation of the KMGBF and functioning of the Secretariat, and decisions on this matter need to be made during in-person meetings. We are therefore of the view that the exception highlighted in paragraph B of Doc SBI/04/11 needs to be qualified. Africa can only support a virtual decision on budgetary matters for the functioning of the Secretariat under extraordinary circumstances. In conclusion, Chair, Africa appreciates the Secretariat's effort on the options to further improve effectiveness of processes under the Convention and its protocols. We therefore request the Executive Secretary to ensure that working documents are made available for meetings of the open-ended intergovernmental subsidiary bodies of the Convention in the official languages of the United Nations at least 6 weeks before the opening of the respective meeting, and ensure that the dates of publication and any updated versions
Cuba, you have the floor, please.
Mr. Chair, distinguished delegate, colleagues, it's an honor to address you on behalf of GRULAC this statement. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the necessity of adapting to extraordinary circumstances that can impede our ability to convene in person. While we support planning for such unforeseen events, GRULAC proposed that paragraph 3, 4, and 5 of the document specify that this measure would only apply when in-person meetings are impossible for extended period, and that decision-making in virtual setting should, as far as practicable, be applicable only to budgetary issues. Multilateral diplomacy is still better made face-to-face. For virtual meeting, we suggest adding a new paragraph stating that the duration of virtual session be limited to 2 consecutive hours per day, considering the varying time zones. To enhance meeting effectiveness, GRULAC proposed the following measures. The participation of developing country delegates must be ensured in a timely manner. Limit the number of contact group sessions or friend of the chair sessions held in parallel during subsidiary body meetings to the number of delegates per developing country who are supported by the Secretariat. Request both bureaus to appoint co-chair and co-facilitator well in advance of the meeting and ensure that support by the Secretariat to the attendance of co-chairs and co-facilitators from developing countries be without prejudice to the support for this delegation in order to increase the ability of our smaller delegation to contribute with such roles. 3. Schedule a mandatory free day every 5 days during back-to-back intergovernmental meetings, ensuring no formal or informal activities occur on this day. 4. Restrict evening negotiating sessions to reasonable hours to protect the health of delegates, particularly those from a small delegation. Accordingly, after 13 hours since the beginning of the first formal meeting of the day, work should continue if no party objects unless otherwise decided. 5. Implement training programs or orientation for delegates from developing countries to familiarize them with the Convention, its procedure, and the link of CBD issue with other multilateral environmental agreements. It should also include training on multilateral environmental negotiating skills and report on this program to the SBI before COP17. 6. Encourage effort to shorten draft recommendation and draft decision, avoiding duplication and redundancy should be without prejudice to the authority of the COP to review its previous decision and recommendation as appropriate. 7. Intersessional work needs to be reconciled. One measure to achieve this would be the task the Secretariat to prepare a year-long calendar of expected activities and actions for CBD focal points, better allowing workflow management. The agenda item under discussion is of utmost importance. Enhancing the effectiveness of efficiency of our meeting is crucial to ensuring that all voices, especially those from developing countries and in small delegations, are heard and fully integrated into our collective effort. Multilateral work does require effort, but it is our only pathway to face the biodiversity crisis. We will suggest our text proposal in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Cuba. Delegates, now I will move on to individual parties, please. Accordingly, the time limit will be 3 minutes only. Canada, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, we'd like to thank the Secretariat for the paper developed for this agenda item, noting the challenges and extreme workload that the team has had to manage. So thank you. We do not have many observations or comments on the conflict of interest procedure, the sequencing of convention and protocol meetings, or the guidance on the use of virtual and hybrid meetings. But the proposal placed before us on the element of options to further improve effectiveness of processes under the convention and its protocols only starts to scratch the surface. Here we are at SBI-04. After a hectic week at SUBSA 26, we have too many items, we have too many square brackets, documents that were posted late by an exhausted and overworked Secretariat, and not even close to enough time to address all of the issues that we have on our plate to implement an ambitious global biodiversity framework that we have 6 years to implement. The fact that we are on the 4th day now, we're still on first readings, and we resorted to cutting off interventions from observers to make up time is very concerning. Organizing and running our processes in the same way that we have up until this point is simply no longer viable. If we do the same thing over and over again, we shouldn't expect different results. We need to look for ways to innovate and rethink our processes, from how we set our agendas to how we organize our plenaries and how we engage our partners and observers. We need to be more efficient and more effective, and we need to bring together the minds of all our 196 countries and our thousands of partners to think differently and come up with creative alternatives. On this element, the document before us only starts to get us thinking. Ideas like facilitating pre-meeting virtual discussions or having first interventions on each agenda item before the meeting in writing or via video, or asking observers to group their advice by major group or some other method, these all need to be fleshed out and examined, with eventual concrete suggestions to be piloted by the CBD. Simply saying, yeah, lots of good ideas, the Bureau should consider these when organizing future meetings, is not enough in our view. It will not result in change, in adjustments, or innovation. So we will be calling for more thinking on this item in a way that engages parties, observers, and experts in this field, as parties had originally asked for in the decision at COP15. We hope that we can continue this brainstorming here at SBI-04, but also understand that further work on this will be needed ahead of COP16. As Canada, we stand ready, as we did after COP15, to support this important process that is crucial to ensure that we make our CBD engagement much more effective and efficient. We will provide our written submissions for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. The parties in queue are Australia, Malawi, Kenya, Brazil. Australia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Australia supports the processes under the Convention and its protocols in becoming more effective and efficient to help with the timely and ambitious implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We very much welcomed the opportunity to be able to provide a submission on this issue to inform the papers for this agenda item. Australia, like Canada and others, stresses the need for improved processes and strongly urge the need to undertake a functional and efficiency review that takes into account the issues raised here at this meeting and through the notification process. Australia supports the use of online meetings where appropriate. However, we also note that online meetings should not be used for substantive negotiations, as they do not allow for free-flowing discussion and hinders the parties' ability to broker compromise. The COP15 online meetings commencing in the middle of the night, early morning hours for us, led to long-term physical and mental health issues for our delegates. We in the South Pacific region therefore very much appreciate the sharing of time zones for online meetings, such as under the DSI Informal Advisory Group, and would like to see this continued for future online meetings. Australia also notes with concern that preparatory meetings are moving away from their intended focus. For example, meetings related to the subsidiary body for scientific and technical advice do not always concentrate on the science or technology, but rather on negotiating more political aspects and positions. As a result, in some cases, the benefits of the expert scientific and technical advice is being lost as we parties debate the content provided by our experts that sometimes change its purpose or intent. We want to highlight the importance of contact groups with strong chairs who focus discussions to help achieve consensus. Australia sees this as vital, as there is an increasing frequency in bracketed text coming out of subsidiary body meetings, resulting in challenging times and many, many late nights for the Conference of Parties. This particularly affects smaller delegations as meetings become longer, more contentious, with negotiations significantly stretching beyond the allocated session times. Successful outcomes of the contact groups are key to ensure the convention continues to make progress. We want to see all meetings of the convention productive and lead to consensus of important and ambitious issues on the journey to implement the KMGBF. Australia will submit our comments and ideas for improvements in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. Malawi, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Malawi supports the intervention made by Zimbabwe on behalf of Africa. Regarding effective participation during the concurrent meetings of the Conference of Parties and its protocol, Malawi acknowledges the benefit of such meetings. However, express concerns that this approach is more effective when a party has a large delegation. We therefore support the position of Africa, as read by Zimbabwe, for the need to increase support for the current from the current focal point to 3. We also call upon development partners and donors, including UNDP, Food Agriculture Organization, to consider supporting developing countries to enhance effective participation at meetings of the Conference of Parties and its protocols. Malawi agrees with the views submitted regarding challenges faced during the virtual and online meetings, while acknowledging the usefulness of such meetings for knowledge sharing and knowledge exchange. We therefore support suggestion option provided in paragraph 21 to this decision document to consider providing financial and technical support to developing countries to facilitate their participation in the virtual settings. Regarding the final decision made during virtual meetings, Malawi aligns with the African group and calls for the need to qualify the type of budgetary matters that can be made virtually, as budget matters are very critical and need to be critically scrutinized during the in-person meetings. With regard to the draft recommendations, we have made textual proposals and will submit them in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. Kenya, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Kenya aligns with the statement made by Zimbabwe on behalf of Africa. As regards the procedure for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest in expert groups, Kenya is in concurrence of the proposed amendments to the interest disclosure form under recommendations 1A and 1B. This will make the framework clear and more user-friendly. Kenya, however, urges the Secretariat to further strengthen the implementation of this procedure by establishing administrative or operational mechanism for independently verifying information provided by experts in the disclosure form where applicable to avoid instances already experienced. On the procedures for convening virtual and hybrid meetings, Kenya appreciates the affirmation that meetings or conference of the parties, the conference of the parties serving as a meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol, and the conference of the parties serving as a meeting of the parties to the Nagoya Protocol, as well as the meetings of the intergovernmental subsidiary bodies of the Convention, shall normally be held in person, except in extraordinary circumstances. With regard to the decisions on budgets, Kenya expresses concern on recommendation 4 that proposes budgets and procedural matters can be concluded virtually. As expressed by Zimbabwe, Kenya considers budgetary matters as critical issues and measures need to be put in place for in-person or hybrid meetings, except in extraordinary circumstances or day-to-day secretariat functioning. Kenya further notes that recommendation 5 on the use of the silence procedure of the United Nations contradicts recommendation 4, with which proposes virtual decision-making on budgetary matters. As such, there is need to relook at the two recommendations and have them harmonized or clarified. On the options to further improve effectiveness of procedure under the Convention and its protocols, Kenya emphasizes that working documents should be uploaded in the CBD website in good time, but not less than 6 weeks prior to scheduled meeting. We note, for example, documents relating to this agenda item 8 were only made available a few days ago, making country review and preparations difficult. Thank you, Chair. We'll submit the submission.
Thank you, Kenya. Brazil, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brazil aligns itself with the statement delivered by Cuba on behalf of GRULAC. The importance we attach to this agenda item is a consequence of the importance we attach to multilateralism. It is only through collective, inclusive, transparent, and democratic work that we will be able to forge the solutions we need. We do not consider that the increase in engagement in our processes is a problem. Historically, the voice of developing countries, as well as indigenous peoples and local communities and other stakeholders, has not carried the same weight as others in the shaping of decisions. The revitalization of multilateralism is inevitably associated with ensuring a level playing field. The assistance provided to facilitate the participation of delegates from developing countries is more than an essential measure. It is the very measure of how much work should be allowed to take place in parallel. If developing countries have the opportunity to have 2 delegates financed by the Secretariat, then 2 should be the maximum number of meetings of any format taking place at the same time. If this is not enough, either more support should be provided or less meetings need to be scheduled. Inclusivity is where we cannot compromise. For developing countries, the challenges to participate in the processes arise not only during the subsidiary body meetings and the COPs, it also relates to intersessional work. Last year alone, CBD focal points received 137 notifications, 137. A step to rationalize this workload would be for the Secretariat to prepare every year a timetable indicating which meetings, actions, and reports are expected for the following year. We would also like to recall that the volume of intersessional work is a function of the time interval between 2 COPs. Mr. Chair, my delegation, as previous delegations, does not consider the working 14 or 15 hours a day for many days in a row, as we have been doing in the last week, is something that should be normalized. It is as detrimental to the health of the processes as it is for the health of negotiators themselves, in particular those in smaller delegations. We have all been there, and we know that it is incredibly difficult for burned-out negotiators to find the energy, creativity, and ingenuity that is needed to build smart multilateral decisions. We can and we must be doing things differently. We should ensure that rest days are scheduled when we are working for more than a week. We echo the calls for reasonable hours in evening sessions and offer a concrete suggestion in this regard. After 12 hours since the beginning of the first official meeting of the day, work should only continue if consensual among all delegations. Some might say that putting a cap in working hours will lead to a more heavily bracketed text being sent to COP, or for a more diluted text being approved at COP. We disagree. Experience has shown us that very often stalemates are a consequence of maneuvers to delay a decision on the issue until a wider negotiating package is forged across different negotiation tracks in the final day or night of a COP. If it becomes clear that the stumbling block is not of a technical nature, but of a political one, an excessive prolonging of the working hours might even be counterproductive. It can reinforce the notion that a given matter is unsolvable, when it is in fact just being tactically reserved, and it might bring negotiators to such an exhaustion point that they might not be able to cross the bridge when they do get there. Mr. Chair, if you allow me a personal note, this is not an abstract issue, it's a very concrete one. The help from negotiators from all delegations have been suffering very strongly. 2 months ago, one of our colleagues, Daniel Machado da Fonseca, passed away during a Global Climate Fund meeting in Kigali. After taking 3 long flights and working very long hours, he had a heart attack. He was only 45 years old, and he's greatly missed it. I wouldn't want something like that to happen in our convention. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. Argentina, you have the floor, please.
Senor President. Chair, distinguished delegates, the Argentine delegation supports the statements made by Cuba on behalf of GRULAC. With the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework, the meetings of our convention increasingly attract more attention and more participation, and their outcomes are even more significant. The proposals presented by GRULAC are essential for the effectiveness and inclusivity of our work in this new reality. In particular, Argentina would like to highlight the following proposals. First, on virtual meetings. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated the need for flexibility. However, intergovernmental virtual meetings need to be a last resource limited to budgetary decisions. Second, we need to make the most of the potential of virtual informal meetings, ensuring equitable participation and preventing the burnout of delegates. Time limits of 2 hours per day could be one solution in this regard. Third, in intergovernmental meetings in person, limiting the number of sessions, parallel sessions, is essential to ensure that all countries, in particular those with small delegations, can effectively take part. Fourth, Argentina supports the establishment of an obligatory free day every 5 days of consecutive meetings, with the aim of preventing burnout and improving the quality of participation. Fifth, limiting night sessions to reasonable hours is essential for the health and well-being of all delegates, in particular small delegations. 6. With more countries actively taking part in negotiations of CBD, orientation training programs are needed so that new delegates can be well prepared for negotiations. In short, these measures would improve inclusivity, transparency, and efficiency of our processes. Argentina is committed to working in a collaborative manner to ensure that all voices can be heard. And fully taken into account in our collective efforts. Argentina supports the proposals for amendments to text presented by GRULAC. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Argentina. The following are in queue. Parties are in queue, please. India, Mexico, Indonesia, UK, Russian Federation, Egypt, New Zealand, China. India, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. India welcomes and appreciates the review and analysis made by Secretariat regarding effectiveness of the process under the Convention and its protocols. We acknowledge the adoption of procedure for avoiding or managing conflict of interest in the technical expert groups convened under the Convention and its protocols. We also welcome the recommendation to ensure that working documents are made available for meetings of the open-ended intergovernmental subsidiary bodies of the Convention in the official language of the United Nations at least 6 weeks before the opening of the respective meeting. We would like to state that availability of working documents before 6 weeks will help to the parties can analyze the issues in detail and present the considerable position on the agenda item during the meeting of Bureau. You welcome the recommendation to hold in-person meeting of COP and holding virtual meetings for online interactive participation consultation among parties. We would like to state that no final decision of the Bureau of the COP may be taken virtually. We would like to mention that in-person meetings are convenient for more in-depth negotiations that require direct interaction, identifying key issues and building consensus with full and effective participation by all concerned through informal discussions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. Mexico, you have the floor, please.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico welcomes the development of the document prepared by the Secretariat and expresses its support to the statements made by Cuba on behalf of GRULAC. In addition, we second the proposals for text amendments sent by our region. These proposals are designed in the best interest to strengthen the efficiency of the processes under the Convention and its protocols, but also taking into account the health, workload, and efforts of negotiators who attend these sessions, in particular considering small delegations. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. United Kingdom, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. The UK welcomes the note from the Secretariat on the review of the effectiveness of the processes under the Convention and its protocols. We support the proposal for amending the procedure for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest in expert groups and the proposal for procedures for convening virtual and hybrid meetings. We also support the recommendations made to improve the effectiveness of the processes, including ensuring documents are made on time, providing support and training for co-chairs and bureau members, and efforts to avoid duplication of work between the subsidiary bodies. But there is so much more that we can do to improve the ways in which we work, to ensure the most efficient and effective use is made of our time together, and to ensure effective follow-up of our decisions. More can be done to support participants with their preparations ahead of meetings, and to make more effective use of our time in plenary and contact groups. We've heard today some concrete suggestions from a number of parties, including Canada, the EU, and Cuba on behalf of GRULAG, and we join them in asking the Executive Secretary to look again at options for improving the working practices and effectiveness of the processes of the Convention and its protocol, and to make recommendations for us to consider at COP16. The UK has submitted some ideas of our own to improve the processes with our statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Indonesia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. At the outset, Indonesia would like to convey its appreciation to the Secretariat in preparing the document. On this item 8, Indonesia would like to convey 2 points. First, hybrid meetings are maybe acceptable, but only and only in very, very special and urgent circumstances. The 2029-2022 COVID-19 experience has taught us that hybrid negotiations are not effective. In-person negotiation is more effective. Hybrid should not be normalized. Promoting inclusivity is good, but if they are not effective, it will bring more negative effect than positive ones. Therefore, we Indonesia to support statement by Cuba on behalf of the GRULAG and others on this issue. Second, providing decision authority to the Bureau members on this issue should only be made of proper consultations with their regional constituents. In this regard, we propose drafting revision to para 5 of the proposed COP hybrid decision, so it will be read along the lines in short as follows. Urgent decisions may be taken by the COP through a silence procedures following consultation among parties and a decisions of the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties, following proper consultations with the parties from the region of the respective Bureau member, and applying the procedure set out in the rules of the procedures for the convening of an extraordinary meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. The parties in queue are Russian Federation, Egypt, New Zealand, China, Norway, Switzerland. Russian Federation, you have the floor, please.
Спасибо. Thank you so much, sir. We would like to start by conveying our gratitude to the Secretariat for having prepared the document. It encompasses a number of very important elements which we, for one, believe to be exceedingly useful for the organization of our further work. We agree with the majority of the proposed recommendations in all 3 components of the document. We also share the calls and decisions which were voiced by delegations here before we took the floor, especially as far as the work of small delegations is concerned. Over the last few years, we have accumulated a great deal of experience when it comes to convening online virtual meetings. However, they should really be kept only for special circumstances, and we fully agree with the approach which was championed by Zimbabwe on behalf of Africa regarding issues which can be considered in a virtual format. I would like to note that if we were to continue to conduct online virtual or hybrid meetings, it is extremely important to ensure that one affords the floor to people in a timely manner online rather than leave them until the end of the queue. The same applies to hybrid formats. One has to ensure that visas are issued for participants to attend on site. I want to underscore the importance of training officials who are appointed or elected within the framework of work of the various bodies of the convention. We back the decision about the convening or the organizing by the executive director, special training for these individuals, especially when it comes to ethics within the framework of the UN. This includes standards and involves formal training modules on this topic, UN modules. This will ensure that officials possess the necessary skills when it comes to fulfilling and discharging their duties within the framework of the convention. And we have a proposal for subparagraph B of paragraph 13. We will, of course, send this text to the Secretariat, as always, in writing.
On a personal note, I like to reflect on many interventions as related to the enormous amount of work given to those bodies and how to cope with it. I think I already stressed before and will do it again. That's all in our hands. That's not just on the shoulders of the Secretariat. We create the volume of work. We create the number of days. We create the number of documents as well as the intersessional reports, analysis, etc. So that's why I appeal to all of us in our future negotiations, seriously think about what we are suggesting and what we are doing, rather than continuously complain for the operations or delivery of the Secretariat, which definitely can improve. But to a certain extent, especially in the situation when we are not providing additional budget to the Secretariat and where we are not providing any additional staff to the Secretariat. Let's together bring it in mind and make our suggestions and decisions in accordance with all those elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. Egypt, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Egypt supports the African Group position on Agenda Item 8 as expressed by Zimbabwe. Egypt proposed the following text suggestion on the procedure for avoiding or managing conflict of interest. A new paragraph 1 bis to read as follows: decides to periodically review the procedure for avoiding or managing conflict of interest in expert groups, and if necessary, propose update and amendment to the current procedure for the consideration by the subsidiary body on implementation for adoption by the Conference of the Party. Also, to add at the end of para 2, check the accuracy of the interest disclosure form submitted by nominated expert. Egypt would like also to emphasize the importance of making all the documents available at least 6 weeks before the meeting in all UN language to allow delegation to prepare their position. Egypt supports the proposal of Brazil and Argentina on the work hours during the meeting. We also align ourselves with the addition proposal of Indonesia on the procedure for convening virtual and hybrid meetings. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Egypt. New Zealand, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand would like to thank the Secretariat for their analysis. As our agenda expands, it is essential we remain seized of the importance of the effectiveness and inclusiveness of our meetings and a follow-up to our decisions. In this regard, New Zealand echoes the comments of Canada expressing disappointment that the document presented by the Secretariat does not reflect the request contained in Section C of COP15 Decision 15/18. This is currently a missed opportunity to identify improvements in how we conduct our work, and we would welcome a further discussion on innovative approaches to improve our effectiveness. We also join other parties in registering our concern that the functional review requested in COP15 Decision 15/34, paragraph 35, has not been carried out. This will be an essential tool in realigning the work of the Secretariat to the KMGBF, as well as modernising and improving its efficiency. We expect that this review will be completed as soon as possible. Regarding Section B, procedures for convening virtual and hybrid meetings, as we noted in our submission last year, New Zealand observed many positive benefits from holding virtual and hybrid meetings. When held in the right circumstances, we observed virtual meetings could enhance progress on an issue, save time and money, and reduce environmental harm. We agree with Australia that virtual meetings are particularly well suited to conveying information where there is no negotiation. That said, our experience of conducting online negotiations during the COVID-19 pandemic was that meetings were often scheduled at challenging times for New Zealand and other parties in the Pacific region to attend. The effect of overnight meetings had a significant impact on the welfare of our delegation. These health and wellbeing effects were greatly exacerbated when meetings were scheduled over multiple nights or weeks in a row, particularly the 6 weeks of virtual negotiations in 2021. While we hope those days are behind us, should we need to repeat in the future, we request the Secretariat be more innovative in its approaches to virtual and hybrid meetings. Better regard to the health and wellbeing of delegates in different time zones will encourage broader representation at virtual meetings, particularly from the Pacific region, better reflecting the true diversity of parties to our convention. New Zealand will submit a short text edit to reflect this. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, New Zealand. China, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, improving the efficiency of meetings of the Convention and its protocols will help better handle their priorities. The draft recommendations prepared by the Secretariat provides a good basis for further reviewing the process effectiveness. China supports the previous speakers on their positions. Based on the experience in the operations of the Convention and its protocols, China supports the use of variety of measures to improve efficiency, including timely issuance of meeting documents in 6 UN official languages, holding online briefings and regional consultations prior to formal meetings to share information, enhance dialogue, and promote consensus. During plenary sessions, parties should upload statements and amendments in advance and reasonably control the length of their oral statements. It is important to ensure the participation of all delegations, especially small ones, in important contact groups and to avoid parallel contact groups. We support the use of technological means to ensure that all delegates, especially those non-native English speakers, to participate in text negotiations effectively. We must ensure transparency in the decision-making process. All formal decisions, including budgetary ones, must be made in face-to-face plenary meetings. Decision documents must be issued in advance in all 6 UN official languages. We support training for contact group co-facilitators so that they can better manage the negotiation and forge consensus. Last, we support developing decision tracking tools to update progress in the implementation of decisions and constantly reviewing and updating the expert group's disclosure of interest forms. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China. Norway, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Norway welcomes the amendments to the procedures for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest in expert groups. Norway also welcomes the suggested procedures for convening virtual and hybrid meetings. With reference to Section C regarding options to further improve effectiveness of processes, we have some general comments. With the recent experience of Substa 26 and the first days of SBI-04, as well as the several inputs to the online survey referred to in SBI-4/11, Norway notes that changes can be made to improve the effectiveness of meetings and negotiating processes. This includes selecting co-chairs with skills, limiting the number of opening statements, and having more interregional consultations identifying controversial items ahead of meetings. Norway also shares the sentiment from the survey's respondents that delegates should refrain from reopening clean text that has already been preliminarily approved when it's presented in plenary for formal adoption. Norway commends the efforts made by the Secretariat in recent days to improve efficiency, such as the indication of new text in non-papers and staying disciplined with time limits for the statements. We do, however, stress the need for improved processes. Mr. Chair, moving forward, Norway supports the comments on this matter made by Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, to name a few, and we reiterate the need to undertake an external in-depth functional review by COP17, recalling Decision 1534. The scope of this review would have to be carefully considered by the parties ahead of the review. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Norway. Parties in queue are Switzerland, Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda. Switzerland, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard to options to further improve effectiveness of processes under the Convention and its protocols, Switzerland considers it to be important that we continuously improve the effectiveness of processes under the Convention and its protocols. Based on our experiences, including the experience of the last 2 weeks here in Nairobi, we should reflect on how we can adapt and innovate our processes. Mr. Chair, we reiterate the importance that all meeting documents are available 6 weeks in advance of the meeting and express our concern that the deadline was not met for several SBI pre-session documents. The late publishing of the meeting documents challenges parties to proceed to a broad consultation process among the stakeholders and as a result impacts the effectiveness of meetings. Mr. Chair, while we support the suggestions for improving the effectiveness of processes summarized in the pre-session document, we are of the view that more efforts are needed in this regard. Switzerland stands ready to discuss additional elements, including those mentioned by Canada, that the Executive Secretary and the Bureau should take into account to improve the processes of future meetings. In this context, Switzerland recalls the request by COP Decision 15/34 to the Executive Secretary to undertake an external, in-depth functional review of the structure of the Secretariat. In our view, the results of this review will be essential input on how we can improve the effectiveness of processes. Mr. Chair, with regard to the processes for convening virtual and hybrid meetings, Switzerland supports the comments made by the EU and its member states. I thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. Democratic Republic of Congo, you have the floor, please.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for affording me the floor. The DRC wishes to back the statement made by Zimbabwe on behalf of Africa. The DRC, in keeping with its democratic traditions, is wedded to values of freedom, justice, the respect of rules which have been established is essential in this respect. The DRC is extremely concerned by the fact that Decision 1/1 on the rules and procedures of the Conference of the Parties was never translated into the other official languages of the United Nations, and this over 2 decades after it was first drafted. We would ask you to do this as rapidly as is possible. The DRC is also concerned by the fact that thus far, questions related to paragraph 1 of Rule 40 have never been resolved. We would ask you to launch an exercise in consideration on just this to ensure that we are able to resolve this. Turning now to virtual meetings. We would want to see this to be a last resort and that the scheduled times enable all parts of the world to participate in an equal way and that the items on the agenda be reasonable ones without substantial impact on the parties who, for one or other reason, might not be able to participate in just such a meeting. Now, as far as the planning and scheduling of meetings is concerned, one has to take into account the specificities and difficulties of developing states. Turning now to the scheduling of meetings, the DRC would ask you to analyze trends pursuant to the convention. The participation of delegates of the 196 parties, non-parties and other stakeholders requires substantial improvement in the effectiveness of meetings under the convention and its protocols. Thus, given that delegations of developing state parties are much smaller than those of developed states, it is simply not fair or equitable to have lengthy meetings in this format. One example is since the 11th of May of this year that I here have been working in Nairobi on a daily basis from 8 in the morning until midnight. And you might imagine this has an impact on both my health, but also on my effectiveness. And this, of course, will not help us to improve the productivity of our work. Unfortunately, we have noted that we are sending a great many documents between square brackets to the COP. This will certainly not facilitate the work. So we do have to improve the effectiveness of our meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Democratic Republic of Congo. Uganda, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Uganda would like to align itself with the Africa position delivered by Zimbabwe on this important matter. Mr. Chairman, Uganda would like to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of documents, and we are confident that effective review processes go ahead to be a bedrock in strengthening the Convention and its protocol with the principle of rationality. Uganda takes note of the Secretariat's report, CBD-Live 4/11, on the implementation of the procedure for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest in expert groups in line with Decision 1433. This will go ahead to strengthen impartiality and independence. We call upon development of decision tracking tools and relevant technologies which remain a priority to strengthen implementation of decisions and monitoring of the implementation of such decisions. In the same spirit, Uganda calls upon the Secretariat to offer orientation and related training programs for presiding officers considered to chair contact groups in order to help them acquire techniques and skills in areas of managing intergovernmental negotiations while facilitating consensus. We commend the Secretariat's strategies for the improvement of convention and protocol elements. However, we note that further reviews are necessary to address the gaps related to matters of procedure. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Uganda. I see no more requests from the parties. I will now invite interventions from observers. I will take these in order as requested. Statements will be limited to 3 minutes. If any organization is speaking on behalf of a stakeholder group, kindly say so at the beginning of your intervention. Again, I request that statements be focused on concrete solutions. I will offer parties opportunity to support proposals made by observers. IPLCs, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. IFB welcomes the summary information provided by SBI-04/11 and supports the main recommendations to increase efficiencies in the conduct of CBD processes and meetings. Specifically for indigenous peoples and local communities, the same challenges identified of limited access to internet and the need for interpretation in UN languages were highlighted with respect to the holding of virtual meetings. As a prerequisite for full, effective, and equitable participation, IAFB underlines the importance of the Secretariat posting the meeting documents in the different UN languages in a timely manner in order to prepare efficiently for these meetings. IAFB supports paragraphs 10 and 11 with respect to participation by observers at these meetings. We support party engagement with rights holders and stakeholders before these meetings as a good practice to ensure whole of society views. On the proposal for major groups to post our statements online before official meetings, this has become a recent practice by the IAFB, but we need Secretariat support for informational webinars, including interpretation into UN languages, to adequately exchange views and to reach a common understanding of proposals from indigenous peoples and local communities. We therefore propose additional language to this effect to be added to paragraph 13, requesting the Executive Secretary as 13D bis to organize informational webinars with major groups, including interpretation into UN languages and improved internet connection via access to government or other offices when needed, to facilitate or exchange views and to reach common understanding about relevant agenda items, particularly for indigenous peoples and local communities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, APLCs.
How do you close this?
I request the parties to offer, an opportunity to offer any support proposals made by IPLCs. Bahamas, Antigua, Barbados, DRC, Egypt. Thank you. Thank you. Comoros. Yeah. Bissau. Yeah. Thank you. NGOs at microphone number 236. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm from the Third World Network, speaking on behalf of the CBD Alliance. We believe that the procedure for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest in experts groups is an important first step towards ensuring the integrity and credibility of the processes and outcomes of the Convention. It is important that the procedure is periodically reported on, reviewed, and improved based on further experiences and lessons learned in the Convention processes, as well as developments in other fora. In the current procedure, there is no express provision on what to do when nominations for memberships to an expert group are not accompanied by a completed interest disclosure form as required. There is also no established mechanism for verifying whether or not disclosures are complete or accurate. The assumption is that each expert will complete their interest disclosure forms in good faith and as accurately as possible. This is insufficient, and reasonable due diligence should be applied by the Secretariat in order to verify if the expert has accurately declared information that may indicate any potential conflicts of interest. We also propose that any significant interest of a particular member should be disclosed to other members of the expert group at the start of the meetings. In this regard, we propose the following text. At the start of any meetings of any expert group, disclose any significant interest of a particular member that was included on the basis of paragraph 4.4 of the procedure to other members of the expert group. And secondly, we propose that the Secretariat publishes a summary of all declarations and actions taken to manage any potential conflicts of interest in resulting reports and work products of an expert group. In this regard, in para 2, we propose to include at the end, at the start of any meetings of any expert group, disclose any significant interest of a particular member that was included on the basis of paragraph 4.4 of the procedure to other members of the expert group. I beg your pardon, I've read the wrong paragraph. It should be, further requests the Executive Secretary to publish a summary of all declarations and actions taken to manage any potential conflicts of interest in resulting reports and work products of an expert group. We will submit this in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, NGO. I offer parties the opportunity to support the proposals made by NGO at 236. Egypt, Ecuador, Zimbabwe, yeah, Cote d'Ivoire. Thank you. Brazil, thank you. Finally, youth, you have the floor. 272 microphone. This is last.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We support the statements made by the IIFB and the CBD Alliance. We recognize the many efforts and ways that the CBD facilitates inclusive participation in its processes, and particularly the spaces for indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, to bring forward collective positions on issues that impact us directly. We also appreciate the openness of country delegates to receive our positions for consideration and the different options there are to approach them. In this spirit, we are also doing our best effort, in spite of many challenges in resources and capacity, to prepare our positions in advance and participate in other ways, such as calls for submissions. Young people face many hurdles to meaningfully participate in this space. The opportunity to deliver an intervention in plenary and to have the opportunity in these to be supported by parties and then be included in the documents under consideration is for us a valuable and significant way to bring views from our community to the space. It is also one of the ways that the CBD is more transparent, participatory, and inclusive than others, bringing wisdom from the ground to global decision-making. We therefore regret when observers' interventions are not heard due to a lack of time, and we hope this can be addressed in future processes. We thank parties for their continued support to provide us space to participate in this meeting, and we stand ready to work together with all present parties, rights holders, and observers here to reach the objectives of the Convention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, youth. Yeah, that's what. I hereby offer parties the opportunity to support proposal made by youth. Egypt. Cote d'Ivoire. Comoros, thank you. Secretariat, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Secretariat would like to clarify on the 2 points that were raised by the distinguished delegate from the DRC, from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. First of all, we would like to confirm that the rules of procedure, decision 1.1, is available in all languages. It is available as an annex to the report of the first meeting of the Conference of the Parties, that is COP 1/17. It's Annex 3 of this report that contains the rules of procedure in all languages. Of course, I would like to admit that we missed the Russian version of the rules of procedure, and that was pointed out by the delegation of the Russian Federation at COP15, and since then we have made the Russian version of the rules of procedure available. That's why that you see only the English and the Russian version separately. Otherwise, all the versions are simply part of the report of the first meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The other issue was that was raised by the distinguished delegate from DRC is regarding the square bracketed rules of procedure. In the rules of procedure, yes, indeed, paragraph 1 of rules 4T of the rules of procedure is under square bracket and also contains pairs of square brackets within the paragraph. And this has been the case, this has stayed for the last 30 years as indicated by the distinguished delegate. But of course, you may be aware that we have a standing agenda item in each of the COP meetings since then, since after the COP1, which says pending issues, and the purpose is just to give a space for parties to reconsider and to resolve the square brackets around paragraph 1 of Rule 4T. But it's not the only rule that's under square bracket, by the way. Even under the financial rule, there is a paragraph, Rule 16, which is still under square bracket for the last 30 years, similarly. So we'd like to clarify this. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. This concludes our consideration of Agenda Item 8. I shall establish a Friends of Chair group to consider the way forward on other options to further improve effectiveness of meetings of negotiation process. Mr. Joaquin Salzberg of Argentina has kindly agreed to chair, and it will meet on Monday. On item 10, I will not establish any Friends of Chair group. I shall prepare CRP. Thank you, delegates, for your cooperation and understanding. Thank you. I adjourn the meeting for session. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Make it clear, CRPs for the other sub-items on item 8.
Under item 8, there will be CRPs for other sub-items.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your understanding. Thank you.